You all have a lot of questions for us about tariffs. We've got answers. Let's start with the basics. First off, what is a tariff? Simply put, tariffs are taxes on goods from other countries. They've been around for centuries. They're often used to protect domestic industries, workers, and they're also used to generate revenue.
Ruth from the Midwest asks this: who pays the tariffs imposed by the White House, the government or the foreign country? Even though the tariffs are on foreign countries, it is U.S. businesses that import products from those countries that end up paying the tariff. It could be the fact that some suppliers in those foreign countries eat the total cost of the tariff, but economists agree that's unlikely. The suppliers will likely pass the tariff down to U.S. businesses, who will ultimately pass that cost down to you.
So the question is, how have foreign leaders reacted, particularly U.S. allies, in the wake of Trump's tariffs? And this is actually fascinating because the reaction has not been broad-based retaliation. There's been a lot of threats over the course of the last couple of weeks, but in terms of tangible action and response, there's been a reticence to take that step, with the exception so far of Canada. More is certainly coming, but this is a moment right now where everybody's stunned, and just trying to figure out how to respond is probably the biggest question leaders have in this moment.
Isaac from Oregon asks, how much will cars go up? Hey, Isaac. So right now, there's a tariff in place on foreign cars imported into the U.S. And according to Anderson Economic Group, they estimate that foreign brands like Lexus and BMW, prices of those cars will rise by about $8,000 to $20,000. And then cars that are assembled here in the U.S. but use foreign parts could rise anywhere from $2,500 to $15,000.
Jeremy from South Carolina wants to know, what should the average U.S. consumer expect to be affected by these tariffs? Well, the first impact is you're going to see some significant changes to your 401ks and your investment portfolios because these tariffs have caused major volatility on Wall Street. You also may see higher prices on imports because companies, they typically pass along at least some of the cost of these tariffs to you and I as consumers. Here's the bottom line. The Tax Foundation estimates that the cost of these tariffs will be $2,100 per year to the typical family.
So John from Florida asks, what does Trump hope to gain by imposing tariffs? And the question is a little bit complicated, but here's what I'd say up front. Trump has made clear he wants fair trade. He believes trade deficits with most of these countries are dramatically too large, despite kind of how trade economics works. The other thing, too, revenue. He wants money for the United States, thinks he can finance his legislative agenda, and then there's negotiating power. How those all actually net out in the end, still an open question, but those are the goals.
The European Union and China, they have already vowed to retaliate. At what point would the administration consider pulling back on tariffs, especially on those 10% across the board tariffs? Where is the room for negotiation?
I don't think there's any chance that President Trump's going to back off his tariffs. This is the reordering of global trade, right? That's what's going to happen. But the world should stop exploiting the United States of America. Let our farmers sell their products. Let our ranchers sell their products.
Allies and adversaries alike are looking at everything you're saying right now about whether there's room to negotiate on these tariffs before they announce what they're going to do. What I hear from you is that there isn't room for negotiation. Is that right? You said that the president won't back off.
What I said very clearly, the president is not going to back off.
So he's not going to back off of what he announced yesterday.
He is not going to back off. He is not backing off.
Nothing could change that.
But countries can fix their tariffs, their non-tariff trade barriers, which are much, much rougher. That's why the story I was trying to tell you is that when we took cars from Korea in 2012, when I grew up, there was no Korean cars in America. When we took cars from Korea, the deal was we could sell ag to Korea. That was the deal. They wouldn't let McDonald's bring in French fries because they couldn't prove the origin of the French fry. That is not a tariff. That is called a non-tariff trade barrier. They take their taxes and they subsidize their steel industry, or they subsidize their energy, or they give the tax back to their car manufacturer.
Right.
This stuff has got to stop. America's got to stop being exploited, and you're going to see America prosper. And then, and only then, will Donald Trump make a deal with each country when they've really, really changed their ways. Then
so it sounds like he might back off down the road, but
that's
not right now.
Back off, and that's not back off. That is let the deal maker make his deals when And only if these countries can change everything about themselves, which I doubt they will. Because
so he is willing to negotiate then? So he is willing to negotiate with these countries right now? Or if they decide to
talking, no talking, doing. These countries have abused us and exploited us, as he said yesterday. They need to change their ways.
Let me follow up with you.
Let's see them change their ways. It's going to be a long time. Let's see what they do.
Global reaction to these tariffs has been mixed. Some countries would like to negotiate on the new levies, try to minimize their impact. Others are planning retaliation.
I know that many of you feel let down by our oldest ally. Yes, we must brace for the impact that this will inevitably have. Europe has everything it needs to make it through the storm. We are in this together. If you take on one of us, you take on all of us.
We are going to fight these tariffs with countermeasures. We are going to protect our workers, and we are going to build the strongest economy in the G7.
The administration's tariffs have no basis in logic, and they go against the basis of our two nations partnership. This is not the act of a friend.
The U.S. government's reciprocal tariff measures are likely to sustain high volatility in the global financial market for the time being, and the domestic financial and foreign exchange markets are also expected to react sensitively.
No friend or foe was spared this time from Trump's tariff moves, but countries in Asia and in Europe were hit particularly hard, including, of course, China. We've seen tariff rates now go up to 54%, very close to that 60% benchmark that the U.S. president promised during his campaign trail. Now, China has responded by calling these actions bullying and has also vowed countermeasures. In fact, in a statement released earlier today, the country's Commerce Ministry spokesperson said, quote, "There are no winners in a trade war, and there is no way out for protectionism. China urges the United States to immediately cancel its unilateral tariff measures and properly resolve differences with its trading partners through equal dialogue." So far, Japan has responded by saying that it's extremely regrettable to see the U.S. impose large tariffs on the country, that it was seeking talks with the United States in order to try to reduce the impact of this. Of course, Japan has also emphasized how much the country invests in the United States in terms of its automobile industry, for instance, which is, of course, a cornerstone of the Japanese economy. These are probably the most aggressive tariff moves made by a president in modern history, and Asia was hit particularly hard. Stock markets across the region tumbled on Thursday following U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement of increased tariff rates. Japanese markets led losses in Asia, with the benchmark Nikkei 225 closing 2.8% lower. Australian stocks also closed about 1% lower. Interestingly, though, no Asian country has announced concrete countermeasures or reciprocal tariffs. In fact, here's what the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, had to say about Australia's response to Trump's tariffs.
The administration's tariffs have no basis in logic, and they go against the basis of our two nations partnership. This is not the act of a friend.
Meanwhile, in Japan, now facing a 24% levy, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the new tariffs regrettable and unfortunate and said that he's going to seek talks with the U.S. to soften the blow. Japan was hit particularly hard as Trump's 25% tariffs on foreign-made automobiles could also hurt neighboring South Korea. Korean tech giant Samsung and automaker Hyundai closed about 2% and over 1% lower, respectively. Stocks of Japanese car makers Toyota and Honda also closed over 5% and 2% lower, respectively. Vietnam and Cambodia, where many international companies have recently shifted production from China to avoid existing levies, saw tariffs rise to nearly 50%, dealing a blow not only to their economies, but also to the other Asian economic powerhouses that do business with them. So clearly, even U.S. allies aren't spared from Trump's tariff wrath. Hanako Montgomery, CNN, Tokyo.